She called him a puppet. He answered with proof. In a packed Fox News studio, Kash Patel and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett went head-to-head. But what happened next left even seasoned anchors speechless. When Patel pulled out that folder, the entire audience froze. This wasn't just another political shouting match. This was a live reckoning, and Crockett never saw it coming. If you care about truth, borders, or what's really happening behind closed doors in Washington, this story is for you. Because in a time when most debates are noise, this one delivered answers. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, who do you believe told the truth that night? It began like any other evening in American political theater. Bright lights, polished suits, practiced smiles. But what unfolded in the Fox News studio that night would leave the entire country holding its breath. Inside the Atlanta set, every camera was ready, every producer tense, and every seat filled. Not because it was just another debate, but because the two people facing off weren't just from opposing parties. They were from two different Americas. On one side, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a firebrand progressive from Texas, sharp-tongued, bold, a former civil rights attorney with a reputation for blistering soundbites and confident moral declarations. On the other, Kash Patel, a name whispered with reverence in conservative circles, a man who'd served at the highest levels of national security, loyal to President Trump, and fiercely unapologetic about it. He was no stranger to confrontation. But tonight, the stakes weren't just reputation. They were legacy, truth, and the soul of the American conversation. As the studio crowd began filing in, the air buzzed with anticipation. MAGA supporters in red hats took their seats with arms crossed and eyes burning with expectation. A smaller but vocal group of progressives clutched handmade signs and leaned forward eagerly, ready to cheer on Crockett as their voice against what they saw as institutional strongmen. In the center of the studio stood moderator Laura Thompson, a seasoned journalist who knew exactly what she was walking into, and knew there was no way to control the fire that was about to erupt. Backstage, Kash Patel stood tall, his tailored gray suit catching the edge of the studio lights. His face was calm, but his hands gripped a thin leather folder, a folder that would soon become the most talked-about prop in America. Inside were documents that Patel had spent weeks assembling. FBI reports, Homeland Security briefings, internal memos obtained through FOIA requests, all legally acquired, all ready to be unleashed, and all aimed at one person, Representative Jasmine Crockett. "She wants a fight," he muttered to his aide, "but she has no idea what's coming." Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, was already on stage. She looked every inch the modern progressive leader, navy suit, immaculate hair, pearl earrings that sparkled under the lights. Her smile was wide, but edged with steel. She knew what this moment meant, a chance to carve out her brand as a truth-teller, as the fierce resistance to MAGA politics. Her supporters wanted fireworks, and she was ready to deliver. But she made one fatal miscalculation. She believed Kash Patel would come unprepared. The crowd hushed as the show went live. "Tonight," Laura Thompson began, "we are joined by two prominent voices in American politics, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, a member of the House Judiciary Committee, and Mr. Kash Patel, a national security expert and former senior official in the Trump administration. Our topic: immigration, border security, and national leadership. Let's begin." Crockett struck first. "I'm here to speak the truth," she declared, her voice echoing through the studio. "Our national security is being manipulated by people like Mr. Patel, who use fear, misinformation, and political theater to push an agenda that helps no one but the wealthy and powerful. He has abused the FBI, shielded billionaires like Elon Musk, and instead of protecting the American people, he protects Trump." There were claps from the progressive corner, cheers from a few audience members. Laura Thompson nodded. "Strong words, Representative." "Mr. Patel?" Kash Patel stepped forward into the light. His voice was calm, but carried the quiet gravity of someone who'd once briefed the president inside the Oval Office. "Representative Crockett says I protect the powerful, but let me ask you something, Jasmine. When was the last time you made a decision that actually protected anyone? Not tweeted about it, not pontificated, but actually stood in the room when the choices mattered?" The audience hushed. He turned to Laura. "She talks about the FBI as if it's her personal enemy. But I was in those rooms. I made those calls. I handled operations that determined whether Americans lived or died. And tonight, I didn't come to talk theory. I brought receipts. With that, he laid the folder gently on the podium. The moment was subtle, quiet, but the ripple it sent through the crowd was anything but. Viewers at home would later say they felt it, as if something had just shifted. Jasmine smiled tightly. Documents? Mr. Patel, I hope you checked your sources, because misinformation isn't just a talking point anymore. It's a national threat. Kash didn't flinch. So is hypocrisy. Laura Thompson tried to bring the tone down. Let's keep this civil. Mr. Patel, we'll come back to those documents. But for now, what is your direct response to the representative's concerns about your qualifications? Patel leaned in. I don't need validation from a first-term Congresswoman who spends more time on TikTok than in security briefings. I've stood before Congress. I've been grilled by people who actually understood what was at stake, and I've never once ducked accountability. The question is, has she? Crockett's eyes narrowed. This wasn't going the way she planned, but the American audience watching, they leaned closer to their screens, sensing that something was coming, something bigger than a debate, a reckoning, a clash not of parties, but of experience versus optics, of substance versus spin. And for millions of Americans, especially older viewers who had watched decades of political posturing, this felt different. This felt real. And it was only the beginning. Laura Thompson cleared her throat and turned slightly toward the camera, but the audience wasn't looking at her anymore. All eyes were locked on the folder in front of Kash Patel, a slim, leather-bound document holder, unassuming at first glance, yet charged with silent menace. Patel opened it slowly, deliberately, letting the tension simmer like a kettle just before the whistle. The studio lights glinted off the glossy paper as he held up the first sheet. This, he said calmly, is an internal FBI report dated just 5 months ago. Page 32, paragraph 4. It outlines a 25% increase in immigration-related crimes in Texas. And those spikes? They directly followed legislative decisions supported, and in some cases, authored, by Representative Crockett. The words hit like a thunderclap. Gasps echoed through the studio. Crockett stiffened in her chair. The audience froze, and even Laura Thompson leaned forward in her seat. The screen behind them flickered to life, and there it was, a projected image of the document with Patel's highlighted paragraph shining in bright yellow. The studio, usually a theater of noise, sat silent. Crockett tried to gather herself. That report lacks context, she countered. Experts have challenged its validity. You can't reduce immigration to a single statistic. I figured you'd say that, Patel replied, reaching for another sheet. That's why I brought this. He held up a second document, an updated summary from the Department of Homeland Security. Patel didn't need to explain it. The highlighted text behind him did the talking. It confirmed the FBI findings. It even included a line that stated the policies supported by Crockett's committee had a direct effect on reduced border enforcement. Jasmine's jaw clenched. The ripple of discomfort spread again through her supporters in the crowd. The MAGA contingent began murmuring excitedly, phones raised, some already streaming the moment live. And just so we're clear, Patel added, lifting a third page, this is an email from your campaign staff. It reads, and I quote, "Border funding needs to be redirected. We can't keep pouring money into MAGA-driven policy." Your words, not mine. Laura Thompson's hand instinctively went to her chest. She wasn't reacting as a host anymore. She was reacting as a citizen. Crockett attempted to speak, but nothing came out. She fumbled for her water glass, pausing long enough to regain composure. You're cherry-picking. You're painting a picture that ignores the human side of immigration. Patel's voice was calm, but ironclad. I'm painting the picture that your votes drew. You say I misuse data, but all I'm doing is reading it. You question my qualifications while standing on a platform built on slogans. But this, Congresswoman, is substance. This is evidence. Boom. The split screen told the story. Crockett, visibly rattled. Patel, calm, composed, and in command. Then he delivered the moment that would be replayed on cable news for the next month. "Representative Crockett," he said, his eyes sharp, "can you tell this audience the last time you reviewed a Tier 1 security brief?" She blinked. I don't discuss classified briefings publicly." "So the answer is never?" he pressed. "That's not what I said." "Because I have, weekly, for years. And I didn't do it for applause. I did it so families in this country could sleep at night without worrying about who or what was coming across that border." Half the studio erupted in applause. The camera zoomed in on Crockett's face. Her previous confidence had turned to defensiveness, her posture stiff, her responses shorter, less certain. Her voice, once booming with authority, now cracked ever so slightly as she tried to steer the conversation back to values, to vision, to unity. But Patel wasn't letting go. He pulled out one last document. "This is an affidavit from Sarah Mitchell, a former advisor on the House Judiciary Committee," he said. "She recalls a meeting, just 3 days after the FBI report, where you allegedly said, 'We need to cut funding for programs that only serve MAGA politics.' That statement, if true, proves exactly what many Americans fear, that politics is outweighing safety." "That affidavit is false," Crockett snapped. She was a disgruntled staffer, fired, in fact. "Then why not release the transcripts of those meetings?" he asked. Silence. For millions of Americans watching, the emotional tide had turned. Especially for older viewers who had lived through decades of spin, this didn't feel like politics. This felt like clarity, like a man who came prepared, like a moment where substance crushed showmanship. Patel finally leaned back. "We can have different views on immigration, but we can't have different facts. And the fact is, your policies, your votes, have consequences. This debate was your idea. This folder, that was mine." "Seo." The audience burst into applause again. And for the first time all night, Jasmine Crockett had no immediate response. It was no longer just a political exchange. It had become something more, a cultural moment, a lesson in being prepared, a masterclass in what it looks like to come not with slogans, but with receipts. And the folder, that quiet, slim folder, had just made history. The applause faded, but the weight in the room remained. For Jasmine Crockett, the silence wasn't just uncomfortable, it was dangerous. She sat on the edge of her seat, the same seat where she had once looked down on her opponents with fire in her eyes. But now, that fire flickered, dimmed, and in its place, something more primal. Survival. Laura Thompson gave her a glance, not sympathy, not encouragement, but a lifeline. "Representative Crockett, I think the audience would appreciate your response to the claims Mr. Patel has made. You have the floor." Jasmine inhaled sharply and leaned into the microphone. Her voice was soft at first, measured, almost too calm. "I want to thank Mr. Patel for reminding America what MAGA really stands for: manipulation and gaslighting America." A few hesitant chuckles came from her side of the room. It wasn't the thunderous applause she was used to, but it was enough to regain her footing. "I won't dignify every document he's waved around tonight," she continued, voice gaining strength. "Because cherry-picked memos don't replace lived experience. They don't represent real families, and they certainly don't reflect the dignity of the people I represent." She paused. This was a gamble, but it was one she had to take. "Mr. Patel wants to talk about classified briefings," she said, her gaze narrowing. "Let's talk about something else: integrity. The same man waving FOIA documents like props is the one who stood by when the FBI was being weaponized to silence whistleblowers. Let's be clear, you weren't protecting the American people, you were protecting political friends." The progressive side of the studio began to stir, a few voices shouting in support. Patel remained seated, arms folded, expression unreadable. Crockett leaned forward. "And since we're holding up documents," she said, lifting her own sheet of paper, "here's one from 2021, House Oversight Records. It outlines how Mr. Patel's name came up in several whistleblower testimonies alleging suppression of intelligence to benefit certain political narratives." A murmur ran through the crowd. Laura leaned closer. "Is that document public record?" "It is," Jasmine replied smoothly. "Anyone can access it, unless, of course, they'd rather live in Patel's version of America, where facts are props and narratives are truth." Patel scoffed audibly but said nothing. His restraint was strategic. He'd scored his blows. Now Crockett was swinging wildly, hoping one would land. But Crockett wasn't finished. She stood, slowly, deliberately. I came here to debate national security, not play courtroom drama with someone who's forgotten what public service actually means. I walk my streets. I talk to families. I attend funerals of those lost to gun violence that crosses our border, not just from immigrants, but from smugglers, cartels, and yes, American citizens who are failed by underfunded law enforcement. That last line hit. Even some in the MAGA section nodded. The issue wasn't black and white. It was layered, complex. And while you were trading memos behind desks, Mr. Patel, she added, turning to face him directly, I was fighting for families to have access to health care, schools, safety, and yes, security. Security from poverty, security from injustice, security from being forgotten. A standing ovation came, not from the full crowd, but enough of it to change the atmosphere. Jasmine had landed a punch, not with data, but with emotion, with vision. It resonated, especially among viewers who saw past numbers and into human impact. But then Patel stood too. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cut her off. Instead, he walked calmly to the center of the stage, folder still in hand. I don't deny that Congresswoman Crockett is passionate, he said, and I don't deny that she's done meaningful work. But passion without preparation is dangerous. And narratives without facts, even more so. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Do you want to talk about whistleblowers? He asked. Let's, because I was one of the few in Washington who stood up for them when it wasn't convenient, when it wasn't politically popular, and when I had everything to lose. He opened the folder again. This, he said, holding up a transcript, is a sworn deposition filed in federal court where my name was cleared of any allegation of data suppression. I brought it tonight not to defend myself, but to remind viewers that accusations aren't evidence. The audience quieted. Jasmine's attack had started a fire, but Patel had brought the water. Then he turned, face to face with her. And while you're talking about walking the streets, I was walking airfields. I was coordinating with our allies. I was overseeing evacuation operations during crises. You criticized me for not tweeting enough? I was too busy saving lives. He didn't yell. He didn't boast. But his words carried. The camera zoomed out. Two figures, center stage, one fighting with emotion, one fighting with precision. And in the eyes of many watching from home, especially older Americans tired of political theater, this was a war between what politics had become and what it used to be. Patel looked out into the audience. There's a place for passion. There's a place for emotion. But if we don't pair it with preparation, with evidence, with truth, we lose what makes this country strong. The studio broke into applause again. Mixed, heated, but undeniable. And as Laura Thompson raised her hand to pause the clash, she said the only thing left to say in a moment like that, we'll be right back. And when we return, we'll open the floor to audience questions. Stay with us. But America wasn't going anywhere. Because this wasn't just television anymore. This was a moment. And nobody wanted to miss what came next. The studio returned from commercial, but something had changed. The silence was different now. Not just tense, but alert. Like a room full of people who had just witnessed something real and couldn't quite decide how they felt about it. Some stared straight ahead, processing. Others whispered to neighbors, shaking their heads or nodding slowly, eyes darting between the two figures still on stage. Laura Thompson adjusted her microphone, glanced at her producer, then looked to the crowd. We're going to take a few questions from the audience, she said. Please keep them short, civil, and direct. We'll start with you, sir, in the third row. The man who stood was older, late 60s maybe, wore a veteran's ball cap. His face was lined with time, his voice steady. My name's Frank, he said. I served 2 tours in Vietnam. I've seen what it means when leadership fails. So my question is for both of you. If you were sitting in a briefing room and there was a credible threat to American lives, who would you trust to act faster? The one with the folder or the one with the feelings? A hush swept through the studio. Even the host didn't speak. Patel nodded slightly. Crockett froze, then stepped forward. With respect, sir, she began, feelings are what remind us that threats have consequences, that behind every decision are people, families, who will live or die because of those choices. Frank raised a hand, not to interrupt, but to steady her. I understand that, ma'am. I've buried too many friends not to. But that wasn't my question. Who would you trust to act? Jasmine hesitated. Then, in a moment of rare candor, she said, in that moment, I'd trust the person with the folder. Gasps. A few shocked murmurs. Even Laura looked stunned. But, Crockett continued, recovering, only if I believed they hadn't cherry-picked that folder to serve their political gain. Only if I believed the decisions were being made for the good of the people, not the good of a party. Patel didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply stepped up and said, fair enough. The next question came from a woman in her 70s. I'm Mary, retired school teacher. My father was an immigrant. He worked 2 jobs, never broke the law. I just want to know, when you talk about immigration and security, are you seeing numbers or people? This time, Crockett spoke first. I see people. I see faces. Children separated from parents. Elderly deported without due process. I see a broken system that criminalizes hope. Polite applause. Then Patel responded. Mrs. Mary, I promise you, I see people too. I see the families destroyed by fentanyl trafficked across porous borders. I see victims of human trafficking. And I also see immigrants, like your father, who did it the right way and feel betrayed that our laws are being ignored. The room shifted again. It wasn't either or. It was both. An independent voter stood next. Name's Jason. I'm not left or right. I just want to know, what happened to truth? Because I watch this and I see 2 smart people who don't agree, but I don't know who to believe. Crockett stepped in. The truth, Jason, is that we're both giving you pieces of it. But my piece isn't in a folder. It's in the people who voted me in, who trust me to protect their interests. Patel answered simply. And my piece is on paper. Verified, checked, available to anyone who wants to look deeper. Jason nodded. Then maybe the real problem isn't left or right. It's how far we've drifted from each other. The audience fell quiet again. This time, not from tension, from recognition. A grandmother from the back row raised her hand. I just want to say something, she said, voice trembling. I lost my grandson 2 years ago to a drug that came across that border. I blame no one here, but I also can't forget that. I don't want revenge. I just want to know someone's doing something that works. She sat down before either candidate could speak. Jasmine looked toward her, eyes moist. Ma'am, she said softly, I hear you. I'm sorry. And I promise you, I will never stop pushing for solutions that see your pain, that honor your grandson. Patel turned to her as well. I'll fight every day to make sure no more grandmothers bury their babies because we were too afraid to enforce the law. Tears, real ones, not from the stage, from the crowd. These weren't sound bites. These were stories, and the audience, both in the room and across the nation, felt it. Laura took a breath. We're running short on time. Final question. A college student, young, nervous, wearing a denim jacket with a faded American flag patch, stepped up. I'm Daniel. My question is simple. If your child was sitting at home watching this, what would you want them to take away from your words tonight? Jasmine blinked. She looked toward the cameras. I'd want them to know that it's okay to speak truth even when it's not popular, she said. That it's okay to fight for people who feel invisible. That leadership is not about being the loudest, but being the most compassionate. She turned to Patel. And I'd want them to listen, truly listen, to people they disagree with. Because that's how we grow. Patel looked straight at the camera too. I'd want my child to remember one thing, he said. Facts matter. Preparation matters. Being ready to defend your truth doesn't make you mean. It makes you responsible. And if you're going to speak, make sure you can back it up. Because lives are at stake when leaders lie. There was no applause, no shouting, just silence. The kind of silence that only truth can command. Laura stood slowly. We'll return with final statements, but tonight, whether you agree or not, you've seen something rare. 2 people, 2 Americas, and 1 stage. As the screen faded to break, the internet lit up. Clips circulated, opinions flared. But deep inside every viewer, especially those who had waited years to see accountability, honesty, and preparation under pressure, one thought echoed loud and clear. This was different. The final segment began without music, without flair, just the quiet intensity of a moment that had already become a touchstone in America's long history of televised reckonings. Laura Thompson stood between the two podiums, her hands folded, her voice lower than it had been all night. "We now move to closing statements," she said. "You each have 60 seconds, but tonight isn't about victory. It's about what America saw and what it chooses to remember." She turned to Crockett. The Congresswoman straightened her jacket, glanced briefly at Patel, then spoke with the firmness of someone determined to leave a lasting impression. "What I hope you all saw tonight isn't just a political debate," she began, "but a collision of two visions for America. I believe in an America that uplifts the vulnerable, that faces our problems with both compassion and clarity. I may not have had a folder full of papers, but I brought the voices of the people who sent me here. And I will never stop fighting for them." Patel didn't shift. He watched her finish, then looked to Laura, who gave him a small nod. "I didn't come tonight to win a soundbite," Patel said. "I came because truth matters. I came because, for too long, we've let headlines replace hard facts. I brought the folder because the facts don't lie. And I stood my ground because someone has to remind this country that leadership is about readiness, not rhetoric. When the noise fades, the truth remains. That's what I stood for tonight." The room didn't erupt. It didn't cheer. It simply sat with the weight of what had been said. The broadcast faded out, but the story was far from over. Within minutes, the internet had fractured into two camps, each one spinning clips, dissecting quotes, framing images into memes. Hashtags like Yujao Folder V's feelings, Yujao Shi Patel prepared, and Dao Shercha Crockett compassion surged across platforms. On Truth Social, Patel was hailed as a disciplined warrior for facts. On progressive outlets, Crockett was praised for her emotional authenticity and humanity. But underneath the viral flare-ups, something deeper had shifted. Older viewers flooded comment sections, recalling the Kennedy-Nixon debate, comparing this moment to the Cold War hearings, even Watergate. "This wasn't politics," one man posted on a veterans forum. "This was the test of who you trust in a storm." Shafing. On a Facebook group for retired teachers, a woman named Linda wrote, "Tonight, I saw a man who came ready and a woman who came feeling. And in my classroom, I taught my students to value both." Church groups began sharing clips of the grandmother's story. Prayer circles included her in their intentions. On Reddit, someone started a thread titled, "Who would you trust with the folder?" It racked up over 20,000 responses in 24 hours. In the halls of Congress, the aftermath echoed differently. Staffers scrambled to clarify their bosses' positions. Crockett's office issued statements reinforcing her humanitarian focus. Patel, meanwhile, received private calls from GOP strategists, praising his composure, hinting at a potential Senate run. And then, something unexpected happened. The widow of a fallen Border Patrol agent released a statement on her personal blog. It read, "I watched that debate tonight. I'm not political. But my husband died protecting the same border both of them talked about, and for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Not just as a talking point, as a person. That matters. Thank you." The post went viral. By morning, it was on every major news show. Both Crockett and Patel shared it. Both offered to speak with her privately. And that's when it became clear. This wasn't about who won. It was about what it revealed. It revealed that America is hungry for clarity, but not coldness. It longs for heart, but not empty sentiment. It yearns for leaders who prepare, but also for those who feel. The verdict wasn't Patel over Crockett or Crockett over Patel. It was that truth without empathy feels harsh, and empathy without facts feels hollow. The next week, classroom debates erupted in high schools and universities. A charter school in Ohio played the debate in civics class. A college professor assigned the transcript for discussion. Sunday sermons quoted from it. Commentators called it a turning point. But perhaps the most profound moment came not from any network, but from a letter, a handwritten letter, from a man in Kansas, a farmer, a grandfather, a veteran. He wrote, "I'm 84. I've seen presidents rise and fall, wars begin and end. But tonight, for the first time in years, I sat in my chair and I didn't yell at the screen. I listened. I heard two Americans arguing not for power, but for their version of the truth. And it gave me hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we haven't forgotten how to talk to each other." And that's what this debate became. Not a blowout, not a brawl, a mirror, held up to a nation still struggling to define itself. Patel and Crockett, the folder and the fire, the facts and the feeling. And the lesson? America doesn't have to choose just one, because real leadership, the kind that endures, lives at the intersection of both. If you believe leadership should be prepared and principled, leave a comment below. Share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more stories that show what real courage looks like.